Hello everyone. Thank you for coming back to our channel. In this video, we will be discussing the next manhwa comic titled Return of the Blossoming Blade, or Return of the Mount Hua sect. Let's go to Chapter 1. Enjoy watching this video. The world was now painted red, and everything in his vision was crimson. The only onol that remained in that place was death. He couldn't help but wonder if there was this much bloodshed necessary. Memories flooded his mind. Brother Jiang Mun, his friends and his junior disciples were all lying lifeless. Clashes between more than 20 different sects, including the 10 great sects, and the highest military unit consisting of paralites with the heavenly demon sect had resulted in its complete destruction. Error lies in only one person, the devil sent from the heavens, the leader of the heavenly devil sect, Kunme the heavenly demon. Chunma's voice echoed in the battlefield was read as he spoke to the only surviving Mount Hua sect disciple. He talked about the unfortunate fate that befell the young warrior, who could have boasted about killing him for the rest of his life if he managed to escape alive. However, Chunma admits that their journey is over, and there's no way they can go further. He then praised the protagonist's swordsmanship, recognizing the Mount Hua sect's swordsmanship as the greatest in the world. But before he could finish his words, the protagonist, with only one hand left, shouts for Chunma to shut up and attacks him with his sword. But Chunma continued to speak and expressed her disappointment at not having enough time, just one more day, and he can become a man worthy of the name Chunma. He warns the protagonist that their battle is not the end and the devil will are back, taking over the world, and nothing can stop them. As he beheaded Chunma, his mind raced with thoughts. He couldn't help but think about the war that has just ended and the inevitable death that is now approached him. He wondered about the fate of Mount Hua sect. Now every member, and the cult members' followers also lost their lives, leaving only helpless children. He questions whether all the bloodshed was caused by the Mount Hua sect was truly meaningful. He wondered if he could be a little more dedicated to training so he can save at least one more life. But all these thoughts now it means nothing. As he collapsed on top of the pile of corpses, he thinking about the fleeting nature of life and its inevitable end. Whether he wants it or not, contemplating the poetic beauty of the blooming plum blossoms, which, like life, must beans at some point. The 13th disciple of the great Mount Hua sect, and one of the 3 great swordsmen known as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint Chung Myung. After killing Chunma, who had caused destruction and chaos in the world, he breathed his last on the mountain peak of the heavenly demon sect headquarters. This short anecdote will be the only legacy he left in this world. An abandoned small child was found outside Mount Hua sect and was taken in as a disciple. As he grew up, he trained together other students his age. One day, a senior student shouted at him, calling him Chung Myung. Chung Myung couldn't help but wonder if his life was flashing before his eyes. The senior disciple scolded him, saying that he was an ascetic practitioner before becoming a martial artist, and that power without ethics is just violence. Chung Myung is tired of hearing the same lectures repeatedly. Even though he was a Mount Hua sect disciple, he knew that he could not fully follow all of its teachings. He felt that he accepted undeserved attention due to his talent. But in reality, he was still a beginner at the sect. He realized that everything he had achieved came from the teachings of Mount Hua sect. Suddenly, an old figure appeared and spoke. It was his brother Jiang Mun. He asked Chung Myung, does he regret his past? Chung Myung answered honestly, admitting that he was regretted. He wished that he was more dedicated to following the teachings of Mount Hua sect, and training hard, he can change the tragic ending of the story. However, his brother Jiang Mun comforted him and told him that there was no need to regret it. Mount Hua sect will continue to exist no matter what happens. As Chung Myung tries to understand the situation, he is suddenly hit on the head. He shouted in surprise. At first he thought it was Chunma who hit him, but he soon dismissing the thought as impossible, because he had killed Chunme and he should dead. When he opened his eyes, he saw that it was a young beggar holding a bamboo stick in his hand. The young beggar repeated Chunma's name in a questioning tone. But suddenly he starts screaming and insulting Chung Myung, accusing him of sleeping late while Everyon people have gone begging. Despite being one of the Plum Blossom Sword Saints, someone respected even by the Beggars Guild leader, Chung Myung found himself threatened and insulted by a child. As he tried to understand the situation, the young beggar interrupted his thoughts and attacked him with a bamboo stick, telling him that he would die today. When the young beggar attacked, Chung Myung quickly tried to block his swing. However, he was surprised to find that his hand became very short, too short to block the attack effectively. In a state of panic, Chung Myung was unable to defend himself and the attack landed on his head. The young beggar continued to attack Chung Myung, hitting him and screaming with "I'm angry." He demands to know if Chung Myung still doesn't understand something, and swears to make him fully understand. The beggar believes that there is a certain limit a person can lose their mind and a good punch is enough to make Chung Myung comes out of his sanity. The beatings continued and Chung Myung was unable to defend himself. Suddenly, a beggar enters the room and witnesses the incident before leaving quietly, planning to come back later. The only sound heard from Chung Myung's room was desperate pleas for mercy, as he begged to be spared the incessant beatings. After being beaten, Chung Myung sat by the lake and cleaned the blood off his nose. He made painful noises and thought about how he had never been beaten this bad, even in Mount Hua sect. Shaking with anger, he decided that he will taking care of the beggar's guild, even if it was for the sake of that boy. As he looked into the water and saw his reflection, he wondered who the child he saw was. He thought about the possibility of reincarnation mentioned in Buddhism and thought that if he knew reincarnation was possible, he would have entered the Shaolin temple, not Mount Hua. Suddenly, the beggar leaves Chung Myung's house when he was beaten appeared and called him. Chung Myung turns around and recognizes him and asks if he was the one who immediately ran away. The beggar asks if he is okay and reveals that it was the young beggar, Jongpal, who beat him. It was always like that. But today he went a little overboard. Chung Myung interrupted the young beggar and raised his finger and said that he wanted to ask one thing. But after a while, he changed his mind and raised two fingers while saying, "Let me ask two things." Both Chung Myung and the beggar looked at each other and expressed their expressions. The beggar's face looked confused. After a moment of silence, Chung Myung asked serious tone, "Am I a beggar?" The young beggars responded by saying that it was clear that they were both beggars, considering the state of Chung Myung's clothes. Chung Myung sat down and, scratching his head, exclaimed in frustration and disbelief that he couldn't possibly be a beggar. He then turned to the young beggar and asked the second question, demanding to know if he knows who Chun Ma is. The young beggar looked at Chung Myung in annoyance and commented that he was originally thought he was acting normally towards someone who had been beaten badly, but now it seemed he was wrong. Chung Myung, losing his patience, shouted at the young beggar to answer just the question. The young beggar sighed and answered that he was know who Chun Ma is. He was the leader of the heavenly demon sect who had died 100 last year. Hearing this, Chung Myung was shocked and shouted in disbelief the news that Chun Ma had died 100 years ago. Chung Myung grabbed the young beggar's shirt and repeated in disbelief that Chun Ma had died 100 years ago. The young beggar, confused by Chung Myung's actions, asked what it does, but Chung Myung ignores the question and asks if he say which are actually. The young beggar answered that there's no point in lying to him, and Chung Myung takes off his clothes. He couldn't believe what was happening just heard. 100 years have passed since he killed Chun Ma. Chung Myung's frustration grows when he wonders why he can't be sent back to the afterlife he died. He felt as if he had been abandoned in a world that moved on without him, and wondering how things could go so wrong. The young beggar noticed Chung Myung's distress and asked if he was okay. But Chung Myung still lost in his own thoughts. He then remembered Mount Hua sect and how they became one of the most powerful sects in the world of martial arts, and wondered if they also affected by the passage of time. Chung Myung turned to the young beggar and asked him about what happened with Mount Hua sect. But the young beggar appeared confused and asked what the Mount Hua sect was. Chung Myung's mind was filled with questions after hearing the young beggar's answer. He then asked if he was a beggar, and the young beggar answered in the affirmative, stating that he is just like Chung Myung. Chung Myung continued his questions and assumed that since the young beggar was part of the Beggars Guild, he must know about Mount Hua sect, which was one of the 10 great sects, was just like Beggars Guild. He expressed his disbelief as the beggar didn't seem to know what he was talking about. But the beggar looked at Chung Myung with a questioning expression and answered, asking what nonsense is he spouting. He then named the 10 major sects: Shaolin Temple, Wudang sect, Dian Kang sect, Kongtong sect, Qingqing sect, Ma sect, Hainan sect, Kunlun sect, Gaibang Union, and Zhongnan sect. He stated that there was no such thing as Mount Hua sect in the 10 great sects. Chung Myung is confused by the beggar's answer, wondering how this is possible. Mount Hua sect was not part of the 10 great sects. That is the end of chapter 1. So now let's we next to chapter 2. Chung Myung grabbed the young beggar's clothes and shook him in surprise. He doesn't believe what he had just heard. The South Island sect has become one of the 10 big sects, and Mount Hua sect was no longer part of them. Chung Myung focus quickly shifted as he demanded to know more about Mount Hua sect. The young beggar struggled to remember something useful, until he suddenly remembered something about the map of Shaanxi province. He spoke up and said that he had heard of such a sect before, and that it probably existed on the map of Shaanxi province somewhere. Chung Myung was immediately interested, and asked did the young beggar know more. The beggar continued and said that even though he did not sure whether Mount Hua sect was one of the 10 great sects, he knew that sect has fallen. This news shocked Chung Myung, who couldn't believe it. Mount Hua sect, one of the 3 most prominent sects in the world, along with Wudang and the Northern Loyalty family, have fallen. He let go of the young beggar, who fell to the groundland. Chung Myung refuses to believe it and states that he needs to see for his own eyes. After the young beggar fell to the ground, he looked at Chung Myung in confusion. Chung Myung stated that he was heading to Mount Hua to see the situation for himself. The young beggar warned him not to go, as he might about to be beaten again, and suggested that he just go begging. Chung Myung shouted at him to be quiet and asked him to answer a few more questions. He pointed out himself and asked the young beggar to identify his name. The young beggar answered with wondering why a beggar has to have a name. The beggar finally gave in and said that Chung Myung's name is Cho Sam. He then asked about his age, and the young beggar replied that he didn't know because beggars don't record their ages. Chung Myung stretched his cheeks and estimated his age to be around 15 or 16 years old based on his complexion. Chung Myung continued his questions and asked the name of the young beggar and the name of the person who beat him. The young beggar was somewhat surprised by Chung Myung's requests, asking if he really doesn't remember anything. He then gave his name as Guchul, and the name of the person who defeated Chung Myung was Cho Sam, but they called him Zhongpao. Chung Myung stated that he was returning the favor double and take revenge tenfold. He asked Guchul to remember his name, Chung Myung from Mount Hua sect, and that he would return the favor the next time they met. After saying this, Chung Myung started to walk away, leaving Guchul standing there alone, but soon he went back and approached Guchul. He asked Guchul about the way to Mount Hua Shaanxi province. The beggar, knowing that he had no other choice in the matter, could only sigh in response. As soon as Chung Myung got the information he needed from beggar, he immediately ran. Every step he took, his mind raced with the thought that he was walking, without assistance with any means of transportation. Despite feeling tired and her face flushed from the exertion, Chung Myung continues, telling himself that he has never ridden before something as slow as a horse, even in his previous life. However, he still ran now, with his body protested against the pressure. As he stumbled and fell to the ground, Chung Myung gasps for breath and exclaims in frustration that he is going to die. He realized Thath's body wasn't fit for such a task, and he was already tired after just a few minutes' run. He couldn't help but think the tough journey he would face. How would he get to Shaanxi province with his current physical condition? He knew he would most likely faint or even die on the way there. Moment that, a smile appeared on Chung Myung's face as he revealed that he had a plan. In this is where his cunning and deceit come into play. Chung Myung's determination grew stronger as he pulled his face from the ground and laughing like crazy, with a sense of excitement spreading through him. He knew that he only needed to train in martial arts to make the most of this opportunity. Chung Myung is aware that even those who have reached the peak of martial arts have regret that they didn't focus enough on the basics when they were younger. Moreover, they also regretted not training harder when their seniors urged them to it, and that they shouldn't get caught drinking the liquor their brother was hiding. Chung Myung remembers the taste of the alcohol, saying that it was delicious. As he started walking, Chung Myung decided to look for a place where he could avoid contact with the physical world as much as possible. Chung Myung sat under the tree and thought the next step. He had a wealth of knowledge regarding advanced martial arts techniques stored away in his head, including the history of the Mount Hua sect and methods of inner ki cultivation techniques. He knew that he could easily learn many techniques other than those taught in Mount Hua sect. However, Chung Myung decided to start with a basic technique called equilibrium. Although it is a cheap technique sold in illegal street shops, equilibrium is one of the beginner techniques taught in the Mount Hua sect. That does not significantly increase the strength of one's inner ki, but it is perfect for cleansing body. Chung Myung understands the importance of building a strong foundation for inner body strength, and he believes that perfecting balance is the first step to achieving this. He knew that he needed to clean properly any impure energy absorbed from its surroundings, akin to correcting small misalignments in the strand after strand of large cloth. And if he could gather the cleansed energy into Danshin body, he would become a formidable martial artist. Chung Myung had just finished his balance training, and he felt happy enveloped him. He believed that his newly cultivated Danshin would become the foundation which will open up a new world for him. With a small but strong force, he was sure will roll like a snowball and eventually become an avalanche that no one will be able to stop. When he woke up, he thought about whether he should run to Mount Hua now, eager to test out his new skills. However, before he could take a step, he suddenly felt something was wrong, and the next second he fall to the ground. Lying on the ground, Chung Myung realized that he had spent all his energy learning the technique. Balance doesn't help the seance when he needed to use his body urgently, and he cursed his misfortune. Moment that day, his brother Jangwon's image appeared in his vision and spoke to him. He said, "Sometimes Chung Myung forgets to use his brain." However, annoyed Chung Myung ordered brother Jangwon left because he annoyed Chung Myung. With a sense of despair, Chung Myung shouted loudly, wondering how he could reach Mount Hua at this speed. In the village area, a young beggar hurriedly walked into the street and approached a old man, addressed him as brother. The older beggar asked what was wrong. The young beggar reported that a novice beggar was intercepting all their beggar money. He explained that the beggar was a small-looking child, and everyone gave him coins. The older beggar got up and said that they needed to teach the novice beggar a lesson. The young beggar pointed at another beggar, who was none other than Chung Myung. Older beggar shouted at Chung Myung, but he didn't react and continued eating. The older beggar shouted again, calling Chung Myung a brat and asking if he was deaf. Chung Myung looked back and casually asked if the older beggar was talking about him. This makes the older beggar angry, and he accuses Chung Myung of speaking informally to him, claiming that the child must have lost his mind at such a young age. While cracking his hand, the older beggar warns Chung Myung that he doesn't know whose permission it is he had to get to beg there. He said that since Chung Myung was still young, he would let him go without getting hurt, but only if he leaves everything he has and gets out of there. Chung Myung looked at the beggars and then at the bread he was eating. He called the beggar came out, said that they had no shame and even took his food. The younger beggar became angry and called Chung Myung a naughty child. Chung Myung got up and started stretching his arm, then punched the air several times, testing his strength. He announced that his Danshin wasn't perfect yet, but it would be enough for now. He warned the beggars that he weak and will not hit them hard, but they may come to him at once. The older beggar became angry and ordered the two younger beggars to kill Chung Myung. As they ran to attack him, Chung Myung easily dodged the young beggar's blows and retaliated with his own blow, sent the young beggar flying. Chung Myung shouted at the beggars, declaring himself to be the Plum Blossom Sword Saint of the Great Mount Hua sect, and started to fight back and started beating the three beggars. After Chung Myung beat the beggars, the three of them sat on their knees together, body full of bruises. The older beggars apologized for their behavior while on the phone chief Chung Myung. Chung Myung, who was eating bread, questioned why the beggar mentioned Ithi is the chief of the tribe. The beggar asks if he should be called chief beggar, but Chung Myung gets angry and asks if he just called her a beggar. Older beggar bowed and apologized again. Chung Myung then asked if they knew the fastest way to get to Shanxi province. The older beggar thought for a moment, and then burst out laughed, saying that he was asking something very obvious. Chung Meon thought the beggar might know something, so he asked if he did know about Shanxi province. The older beggar chuckled and replied that if they knew of such a thing, they will not become beggars. Chung Meon didn't say anything, and just stared the old beggar. Chung Meon then started to smile, and said it seemed he was barking up the wrong tree. He then started laughing, and the older beggar joined in. However, suddenly he grabbed the older beggar's clothes, surprising him. The beggar looked at Chung Meon with a questioning expression, while warning him that if they meet again in the future, he better be prepared and answer if Chung Meon asks him something. Otherwise, he might not be so lucky next time. Chung Meon then told them to leave if they understood it, and they immediately ran off, answered in a frightened voice that they understood what Chung Meon meant. That is the end of chapter 2. So now let's we next to chapter 3. In a valley surrounded by mountains with stunning views, an old man stood at the side window, admiring the stunning view and blooming plum blossoms. Suddenly, a voice called him from outside, addressing him as sect leader. Sect leader turned around and warmly welcomed the person, Unam, enters the room and mentions that it wasn't anything important, but a child requested to meet the sect leader. Curious, the sect leader looked outside and saw Chung Meon standing there with his hands raised in greeting. Chung Meon respectfully greeted the sect leader, introduced himself, and expressed his desire to join Mount Hua sect. The sect leader ponders and asks Unam if he has told Chung Meon that there does not accept new members. Unam confirmed that he had done it, but even so, Chung Meon really wanted to meet the sect leader. When they turned to Chung Meon, he appeared smiled, but in reality, he was very upset. To understand why, we need back to a moment ago. Chung Meon arrived at Mount Hua with stick in hand and gasping for breath. He thought of the shortcut the three beggars told him about, but that didn't help him much. Even so, he finally got here, and he swore he would not forgive the beggars if they met again. With determination in his eyes, Chung Meon started climbing the stairs, panting. He promised himself to climb as if his life depended on it. After climbing the stairs, Chung Meon started climbing the mountain. Suddenly, the rock he was holding and fell, but he managed to balance himself. With a stick in his mouth, he looked down and thought that anything was possible if he was tenacious enough. He continued climb and vowed to reach the top of Mount Hua. Once he reached the top, Chung Meon stood up and looked forward while panting. He couldn't believe it when he realized that the Mount Hua sect's signboard was gone. He shouted frustrated, remembering the past and the nameplate that Brother Jang Mun cleaned every time morning. He wondered where it had gone and almost went crazy. Moment the sect door opened, and someone asked who was there. Unam looked at Chung Meon and saw that it was just a child. He asks if Chung Meon came alone, and how could he came all the way here alone. Chung Meon looked at Unam, but did not answer that question. He thought to himself that he had just climbed up here. Nonetheless, he cleared his throat and said there was something he wanted to ask. He wants to know if Unam is a martial arts practitioner of Mount Hua sect. Unam confirmed that he was indeed from Mount Hua sect. Chung Meon was happy to know that the sect had not completely disappeared. Unam interrupted his thoughts and invited him in. Chung Meon looked at him with a questioning look and asked what was going on. Unam explained that they didn't accept outsiders, but it was too late for him to come back down. He said that they couldn't let guests from the Mount Hua sect come back down midnight because the weather on Mount Hua becomes very cold when night falls. As Chung Meon entered through the sect door, he was shocked by what he saw. The training ground had a dirt floor, and he wondered why don't they just use marble. Unam noticed his expression and asked, "What is it?" Chung Meon tried to calm himself down and forced a smile, saying that the training ground is very spacious and nice. Unam seemed satisfied with the response. However, as they walked further, Chung Meon realized that the entire building was gone, and he was shocked. He thought in disbelief what happened to Heavenly Golden Palace. Chung Meon pointed at the missing building and asked Unam if the building was always empty. Unam responded by humming in acknowledgement that it was also obvious to Chung Meon. He explains that the palace once stood empty land, but now it's gone. Chung Myung wonders where they went, but Won-am just laughs and says that's not something anyone his age would know. He admitted that it was embarrassing for a martial arts practitioner to say, but it was a kind of wound of glory. Chung Myung wasn't convinced and muttered, "Oh my." Won-am asks what he said, but Chung Myung quickly brushes it off, saying that it is nothing. Won-am motioned for Chung Myung to follow him quietly. As they walked, Chung Myung's thoughts drifted. He couldn't help but feel empathy towards Mount Hua sect's decision to sell the heavenly golden palace. He realized that they must have faced countless hardships and difficulties in trying to keep the sect in order has not disappeared until now. After a while, Won-am stopped in front of a building and stated that it was Yuyuan Temple. Chung Myung took a moment to observe the temple and noticed that the temple appeared to be intact. Won-am opened the door and motioned for Chung Myung to come in. He whispered that Mount Hua sect was a martial arts sect, and as such, guests also had certain responsibilities, including paying respects to their ancestors. So he told Chung Myung to prepare to pay his respects to their ancestors. Chung Myung entered the room and installed a questioning expression on his face. He noticed the golden candlestick bestowed to ancestor Daetong rites by the emperor of the Jin dynasty, hanging scrolls handwritten by ancestors, the gold-plated decorations, and paintings that used to fill the room were all gone. Chung Myung scanned the room with his eyes, and his expression suddenly changed, surprised. He noticed the flower was missing. He exclaimed aloud, wondering where did the flowers go. Won-am looked at Chung Myung, who was acting strangely, and said in a questioning tone, asking what flower. Chung Myung looked back and clarified that there should be flowers in the room and wonder where they went. Won-am heard her question and asked how she knew about the flower. After thinking for a moment, Won-am remembered that there were plum blossoms made of strange white metal which used to be in the room. Chung Myung's eyes lit up in recognition, and he immediately asked where the flower was. When Chung Myung listened to Won-am's explanation with a pale face, Won-am smiled and revealed the truth. They have sold the flowers, because of them couldn't find a use for it and didn't fit in with the temple decoration. However, they are managed to find a trader willing to buy it at a good price. Chung Myung fell to his knees in shock and despair. He thought about Mount Hua sect's unfortunate fate and how they lost their sacred artifact. To this sacred artifact of the Mount Hua sect was a white plum flower with nighttime fragrance and divine sword of the violet dawn. White plum flowers with nocturnal fragrance, not as flashy as gold and not as flashy as silver. But this flower holds the righteous spirit of Mount Hua sect, made it a sacred artifact. And now these fools have sold it. As Chung Myung kneels, Won-am rushes to him and asks if he is okay. Chung Myung knew that he needed to intervene as quickly as possible before they made it bigger mess. Suddenly, he bowed to Won-am and proposed application. He asked Won-am to allow him to meet the sect leader and join Mount Hua sect. The scene then shifts to the present, where the sect leader looked at Chung Myung with a curious expression. He asks if Chung Myung knew about Mount Hua sect because he wanted to join them. Chung Myung confirms that he knows about the sect and wants to join the sect, and the sect leader considered the request. He knew that entering the sect not an easy task. As he thought about his next move, Chung Myung thought that he had a plan. He decided to use the name Chung Jin Yang, supposedly lost in the middle of the war. Chung Myung went on to explain that Chung Jin had fallen from a cliff and was found by a passing lumberjack, who treated him the wound. In gratitude, Chung Jin taught the lumberjack a martial arts technique Mount Hua sect and treated him as his disciple. Chung Myung then reveals that he are the descendants of the tree cutter. Chung Myung's face lit up with a smile at the moment he thought that this was the perfect scenario. He was happy to be able to decide his own position in the sect with this story. As the grandson of a lumberjack, his position technically on the same level as the sect leader. This scenario is not the only unimpressive, but would also put him in a higher position than the younger players. Chung Myung then waited for the sect leader's response, ready to face rejection or questions that may confront him. However, Chung Myung was surprised by the sect leader's unexpected approval of his entry into the sect. He looked at the sect leader confusedly, trying to understand what had just happened. The sect leader then explains that if Chung Myung really wants to join the sect, then he should be allowed to do so. This decision even surprised An-am, who remanded the sect leader due to his previous statement about not accepting any more entries into the sect. However, the sect leader changed his mind, believing that it might be their fate to accept Chung Myung into the sect. Chung Myung couldn't believe his luck, and he couldn't folding back the feeling that the sect leader should have been more suspicious of foreigners before accepting them into the sect. The sect leader then explained philosophy, stating that they do not chase away birds seeking refuge or animals seeking refuge food in winter. Likewise, they cannot deny a child who is desperately seeking entry into the sect. The sect leader then instructed An-am to provide a place to stay for Chung Myung and prepare for the acceptance ceremony. An-am straight away bowed in agreement and promised to immediately prepare everything. Chung Myung's plan had failed, and instead of being on the same level as the sect leader, instead he found himself at the bottom. He felt disappointed because of his plan didn't go according to his wishes. Chung Myung put on his new uniform and felt disappointed in himself for wearing the clothes of a third-rank student. He looked around the room, wondering where he was. He thought he remembered this place is used as a living room. He peeked out the bedroom door and found it strange that this was a temporary place for those scheduled to enter the sect. He remembered that Mount Hua sect originally didn't have private dormitory rooms, and newly joined members will immediately form a bond contract with their teacher and stay in their teacher's room. He walked out of his room and curiosity got the better of him, and he peeked through the door of a nearby room. Surprisingly, he realized that there were people staying in this room. Suddenly, he heard a voice from behind which surprised him. Chung Myung turned around and found a disciple in a Mount Hua sect uniform standing behind him. That's the end of chapter 3. Let's we next to chapter 4. The student shouted at him, questioning his intentions, and asked if he was a thief. As the commotion continued, the boarders rose from their rooms and start discussing the situation. One person asked what happened, while another asked about Joe Gul. Joe Gul explains that he caught someone peeking into his room. Chung Myung sighed inwardly, wondering why he always seemed to attract trouble. Suddenly a loud voice interrupted the commotion. It belonging to the chief of the boarding house asked for silence. Great brother enters the room and scolds the students for causing trouble in the dormitory when it came time for training. The disciples immediately apologized to Great brother. Great brother then turned his attention to Chung Myung and asks her name. Chung Myung introduces himself, and Great brother recognizes Hymus, the new resident of the White Plum Blossom dormitory. Great brother instructs him to rest for the rest of the day and participate in training starting the next day. Meanwhile, the other students were told to leave and go downstairs. The students obediently followed Great brother out of the room. Joe Gul, however, turned around and threatens Chung Myung that he will deal with him later and teach him a lesson. After Joe Gul left the dorm, Chung Myung stood alone with a blank expression on his face. He mused to himself, noting that they were his cute little successors from the Mount Hua sect, and he would make sure to give them proper attention, even if the method's different from the others. After their practice session, Joe Gul approaches Chung Myung and asked him to take it off. Chung Myung asked confusedly what to doze off. Joe Gul asks him to take off everything he is wearing, suggesting that is the way to go for men to get closer to each other. Joe Gul suggested that he take off all this clothes dance and get beaten up a bit, as this will strengthen his affection towards brother Jangmun. Chung Myung's expression darkened because of Joe Gul's insistence on taking off all her clothes. Chung Myung asked. He wanted to know about the dorm counselor, Great brother, but Joe Gul tells him that Great brother doesn't practice in the afternoon. He also commented that the naughty boy couldn't stop talking, made him change his mind about their previous plans. Joe Gul suggests they start with a little beating. Chung Myung then made an unexpected move, asked Joe Gul to flex his neck muscles. Joe Gul seemed confused by the request when suddenly Chung Myung's fist landed on his mouth, cutting him off mid-sentence. The impact was so devastating. The roof of the boarding house was damaged, leaving a hole. The students present in the Plum Blossom dormitory were stunned as they watched Chung Myung's actions. Chung Myung stands with his arms raised high, and Joe Gul is stuck in boarding house roof. The members of the hostel also shed tears when they saw Icho Gul's difficulties. A few moments later, all the students sat inside straight line and bowed to Chung Myung. Chung Myung then ordered Brother Yoonjong, who was massaging his shoulders, to apply more pressure, and told him that he gave him special treatment because he was the great brother there. Yoonjong responded with a respectful tone and promised to do his best. Chung Myung looked at Jo Gul, who was prostrating in front of him. When Chung Myung called Jo Gul, he looking shaken with fear. But Chung Myung assures Jo Gul that he one-third him and asked him to report it. He then explained that he still wasn't used to it with the situation at Mount Hua sect, and had some questions for him. Jo Gul answered respectfully and said that he could ask him anything. Chung Myung then asked Jo Gul about the Heavenly Golden Palace and the reason behind the chaos in Mount Hua sect. Jo Gul hesitated for a moment and then asked if Chung Myung knew about the Plum Blossom Holy Sword. Chung Myung admits that he did and internally thinks that he is the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. According to the Sasuk, the Plum Blossom Sword Saint played a major role in defeating Chuma. However, this victory was infuriating the remaining heavenly demon sect group, who then barged into Hanyuan region. For some reason, they forced themselves to reach Mount Hua and burned the entire mountain. As a result, Mount Hua sect suffered heavy damage and has not been able to recover its former strength. After hearing this, he realized that he was the reason why Mount Hua sect fell. He was filled with regret and frustration of this awareness. Brother Jang Mun and Chung Myung sat in a small table in Mount Hua sect. Jang Mun brought up the Tae Flumok sword technique, which does not have a Taoist aspect and is not very strong. He advised that it would not become a problem to remove the technique from the sect's teachings. Chung Myung, who was busy eating, agreed with Jang Mun's assessment and even suggested throwing it away this technique. Jang Mun hesitated, because the technique was left behind by their ancestors. Chung Myung then suggests a solution. To prevent children from being attracted of him, they had to remove it completely from the library. Jang Mun was happy with the idea and agreed to follow through. Then Jang Mun changed the topic and revealed that he didn't call Chung Myung there just to discuss this matter. Chung Myung looked at Jang Mun curiously, wondering what else was on his mind. Jang Mun suggested that it was time for Chung Myung to accept some disciples, and asked him how he planned to teach them. Chung Myung answered with a smile, suggesting that he should beat them up first. Once he beats them to the brink of death, they will surpass their limits and make the impossible happen. After that conversation, Jang Mun never talking about student topics. Suddenly, Yoonjong's voice broke Chung Myung's daydream. Yoonjong reports that the dorm counselor, Great Brother, has called Chung Myung to come to Sam's training grounds, where he will participate in training started that day. When all the students stand up training ground with knives in their hands and following Brother's instructions to perform this technique, Chung Myung and Unam stand side by side watching practice. However, Chung Myung's face looked questioning. Chung Myung expressed his curiosity to Unam by asking about his sword techniques practiced by students. Unam explains that this technique is called Equilibrium Sword Technique and is the basic sword technique for all another technique of the Mount Hua sect. However, Chung Myung watches them practice with a strange expression on his face. He argued that the technique did not help in making children stronger, and more in hindering their progress. According to him, the technique is too complicated for beginners and is similar to teaching alphabet using a complicated thesis book. He approached the practice area with a sword in his hands and continued to ponder his thoughts. Chung Myung believes that practicing this technique may provide a temporary advantage to the participant, but without a proper basis, this technique would be useless to them. He concluded that if the students wanted to practice these techniques, at least they should be taught properly. Chung Myung looks up at the beautiful blue sky and compares its emptiness to the future Mount Hua sect. He felt lost and wasn't sure where to start to help the sect. Turning to one of the students, he called out to him, startling the young man. Chung Myung then asks him what else they learned besides the equilibrium sword technique. The disciple stammered a bit and explained that they would be studying sword techniques the 7 sages after mastering the equilibrium sword technique, and then about to graduate from Plum Blossom House to learn the Little King sword technique. Finally, after studying everyone, they would be able to learn Mount Hua sect's sacred techniques, Tei Flumok's sword technique. Chung Myung's expression turned dumbfounded when his disciple mentioned the Tei Flumok's sword technique. Memories of Brother Jones' wordsman appeared in Chung Myung's mind again. His mouth dropped open in disbelief as he processed the situation. He was frustrated and confused, unable to understand why they were studying technique they had agreed to discard. He couldn't help but wonder what happened with their supposed 24 moves plum blossom sword technique learn. Suddenly a brother interrupted Chung Myung's reverie by shouting, demanding to know who was speaking and ordering the person to move forward immediately. At Plum Blossom Dormitory, Chung Myung calls Jo Gul and asks Jo Gul for help, and Jo Gul eagerly agrees, asking what help he could do. Chung Myung instructs Jo Gul to gather everyone at the front White Plum Blossom Dormitory at 5 a.m. the next day and prepared 5/8 per person. Jo Gul is surprised by Chung Myung's request and asks if he really wants her to prepare that. Chung Myung asks if Jo Gul thinks he can't do it, and Jo Gul responds with nervously says that he will finish his work. As Chung Myung watched Jo Gul leave, he pondered the state of the Mount Hua sect. He knows that the sect lacked wealth, technique, and talent, and had the potential to collapse overnight. However, of these three factors, Chung Myung believes that talent is the only one thing he can control. Despite being a third-year student at the moment apparently not very talented, Chung Myung remembered the saying that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. He considered raising this talentless brother as his first step in the journey of rebuilding the Mount Hua sect. At 5 a.m., all the students gathered outside the White Plum Blossom boarding house. One of them expressed his annoyance at who made them come and go as they pleased. He turned to Jo Gul and Yoonjong and hoped they would agree. Jo Gul thought to himself that they probably weren't at the boarding house last night. Suddenly, Chung Myung appears and asks if he is they were talking about. Brother who complained confirmed that it was him and questioned this lack of respect for his seniors. Chung Myung's face showed some thought, but then he smiled broadly and apologized, saying that he must have been lacking understand his brother. He approaches the complaining and suggests that they chatted briefly in the boarding house as an apology. Chung Myung leads everyone who complains inside the dormitory. The students who left outside watching as the dormitory building immediately began to shake. Jo Gul surprised and thought that the building was shaking slightly. Not long after, all the people who entered the boarding house ran in fear until they formed a line outside. Chung Myung expressed his satisfaction with their behavior, but also asked them to quieter, or they will wake up the great Sasuk who was previously complaining. Chung Myung then greets them and states that they will practice together each morning at the same time. As the morning sun rises, Great Brother opens his eyes and realized that no one had come to greet him in the morning. He felt a little bit annoyed and thought that everyone in the White Plum Blossom dormitory must be still asleep. While getting ready, he continued his thoughts, considering there were new arrivals in the house, so they must all still be asleep after that completed their strange welcoming ceremony. He left his room and started walking around thinking that he would teach them a proper lesson this time. Great Brother initially thought that even if Jo Gul went too wild, Yoonjong Wuldis there to stop it from going too far. However, when he arrived at the boarding house, he was confused by the sight before him. Some of the disciples were lying on the ground, while others, trying to get up, and some struggling to catch their breath. Great Brother looked at them and wondered why everyone was in such bad shape. He couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked out loud, "What's going on here?" However, none of the students answered his question, and they tried to look away. Great Brother doesn't understand why his students are avoiding his questions. As a senior at home, they should tell you what happened. His eyes then fell on Jo Gul looking like he had just come out of the grave. However, his attention was quickly attracted to the figure standing behind Jo Gul, the newcomer who arrived the day before. Chung Myung is doing squats while lifting heavy weights placed on his shoulders. Although his body was shaking, he didn't stop and pulled the weight and counted 10,085. That's the end of Chapter 4. Let's we next to Chapter 5. Chung Myung casts his gaze downwards and realizes that Senior Brother is standing right there underneath. Realizing this, he called Senior Brother the Great Sasuk. Senior Brother met his gaze, realizing that Chung Myung looked very tired, even his legs trembling as he stood up. Concerned about Chung Myung's health, Ungum turned around and ordered his students to bring him water immediately. But Chung Myung insisted that it was nothing to worry about. After he quenched his thirst, senior brother asked him to explain what happened. Chung Myung responded with a smile and explained that it was just a small exercise they decided to do together starting that day, and everyone was excited and pushing themselves too much. Because it was the first day, senior brother looked at the students wondering if they were really excited and saw them shaking heads in denial. But they all stop as soon as Chung Myung looks at them. Senior brother thought inwardly, wondering how they could be so afraid of this new kid. Thinking that he needs to give Chung Myung a warning, senior brother rebukes him, saying that the White Plum Blossom dormitory had its own rules, and Askuo gave him permission to sacrifice his sleep for training. Chung Myung simply replied, "Then I'll stop." Senior brother was surprised by this unexpected response, and in anger he thought that he could focus on the fact that Chung Myung had threatened his senior. However, when he saw Chung Myung's innocent face, senior brother gave up on the idea. He realized if he did that, it would upset everyone looking like fools, including himself for being pressured to train by a newcomer. Chung Myung interrupts his thoughts and asks senior brother for 1 month's time. He promised to produce results within the specified time period, while at the same time admitting respecting the determination of his fellow students during challenging training sessions. He turned to them and asked if they agreed, and they answered in the affirmative. Senior brother watches Chung Myung and thinks that he probably means no one who dared to complain to him. He wondered where someone like him came from, because he had taken complete control over third graders, but intends to use that control solely for training objectives. Senior brother asks why Chung Myung insists on practicing every morning, remembering the difficulty of the task. Chung Myung answered, saying that they could become strong enough with the teachings of Sasek the Great, but they could speed up the process by putting in more effort on their part. Therefore, it is natural if they sacrifice their sleep for training. Senior brother then asked Chung Myung what he thought was the most important aspect of caring brother Nia. Chung Myung replies that it is courtesy, and he will consider his brother like the sky. Senior brother smiled unconsciously as he thought that Chung Myung will not look down on his seniors, but maintain good manners towards them to maintain hierarchy. He then spoke to the disciples, expressing his admiration for their determination to participate in the dawn training voluntarily. He encouraged them to continue their efforts and assured them that they will achieve extraordinary results if they keep doing it. When senior brother leaves, the students try to ask help, but he ran past them at lightning speed. After senior brother left, Chung Myung clapped his hands and with a smile, suggested that they chat for a while at boarding house, assuring them that he did not mean to harm them in any way. A few moments later, just screams were heard from the boarding house. Several days passed while Chung Myung sat down to practice. He thought about his progress and the things he discovered about Mount Hua sect. He noted that his Danshin was still small and weak, but it was starting to settle down. He also knew about the White Plum Blossom dormitory, which is a private dormitory that was created in a hurry due to lack of people to form student master contract with. Chung Myung also thought about the sect leader in Dundu, noting that while their personalities are weak, their powers can't even be compared to Mount Hua sect 100 years ago. As a result, their students become very weak. However, Chung Myung was not discouraged by this. He believes that with his presence in the sect, becoming the strongest sect was not an unattainable dream. In the dining hall, a group of students sat eating. One of them tried eating with chopsticks, but the chopsticks fell from his grasp, causing him to exclaim frustration. He screams that they shouldn't train to the point where they can't even eat right. Turning to Jojo Gol, he asks him to speak to Chung Myung on his behalf. He complained that he had trouble using chopsticks for days, and that makes him crazy. Jojo Gol was silent for a moment. Finally, he speaks up, saying that they talk too much. He put down his chopsticks and told them that their brother was not their lackey. He asked them why they didn't go and talk to him directly, because there is no need to involve other people. Jojo Gol then stood up and spoke to Yoonjong, asking if he could take a moment. Yoonjong agreed, and they both left. As they walked out, Yoonjong commented on Jojo Gol's fresh appearance. But Jojo Gul was silent for a moment, then asked Yunjong's opinion about the Mount Hua sect. Yunjong stated that it was a difficult question to answer. Jojo Gul then shared that once he decided to return to his hometown, everything would be over for him. He wondered if Yunjong planned to spend his entire life on Mount Hua. Yunjong admits that Jojo Gul is right. There was a moment of silence between them before Jojo Gul spoke again, saying that he initially thought it was Mount Hua sected is over. Yunjong scolded him for being impolite and reminded him that it was not something he should say easily. Jojo Gul states that he has changed his mind about the Mount Hua sect. After Chung Myung arrived, he realized that he had never pushed himself to the same level in training. Seeing Chung Myung training intensely without showing signs of fatigue inspired Jojo Gul to try his best and become a master capable of leading the whole world. Yunjong agreed with a smile, saying Fathy shared Jojo Gul's thoughts. Meanwhile, Chung Myung watches from a nearby tree, feeling happy with the results. He thought that convincing senior brother was easy enough, but he still had a way to go. Before he could think further, a loud shout interrupted him. He asks the sect leader to come out. Outside the gates of Mount Hua sect, a group of people shouted and banged on the door, demanding to be let in immediately. Without warning, the doors suddenly opened, and a crowd of people charged into the sect, causing chaos and demanding the sect leader leave. Despite senior brother and Unam's efforts to pacify the unruly group, they would not listen. Chung Myung watched in disbelief that they broke through Mount Hua sect gate. He wondered what was going on. Suddenly one of the intruders spoke up, saying that they had waited long enough and no can wait any longer. They demanded to know when Mount Hua sect would pay them back. Chung Myung was shocked to hear the request for payment, his mouth agape in disbelief, and couldn't help but question whether Mount Hua sect was truly in debt considering the current situation. That is the end of Chapter 5. Stay tuned for the next one. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you, everyone.